Thank you so much for joining us today, Shankari.
Thanks for having me, Val. Very excited to be here.
I'm very excited. This is so beautifully written. This is such a fantastic book. Your latest book, Chai Time at Cinnamon Gardens, for listeners who have not got a copy yet, can you tell us what it's about?
Chai Time at Cinnamon Gardens follows the lives of the residents and the staff at a nursing home in a fictional suburb in Western Sydney. It's set against the rising racism of contemporary Australia, but it flashes back to the lives of the elderly residents decades before in their ancestral homeland of Sri Lanka during the country's civil war. The novel is about the stories that the residents and the staff tell themselves and each other to keep their memories and their culture alive.
There are so many layers to this novel. So I'm interested to know how it formed, which bit came first, the nursing home, the themes, the history. Where did it all start?
For me, the genesis of this novel was in a nursing home, and it's based on the nursing home in Western Sydney, where my grandmother lives and has lived for a number of years now. And a lot of the residents there are Sri Lankan Tamil. And so when we go to visit her, and I'll take our 4 children with me, we will run into my cousins and to family friends who are all visiting their relatives. And so at any given time, you'll have 4 generations, in a room laughing and talking and telling stories. And I thought this is a beautiful place of community and a beautiful place to set a story. And so it started there, and there were little scenes. There's a scene that's set in the prayer room of the nursing home where the elderly, engage. They come to fisticuffs, as it were, over sort of religious hierarchies. And that came from spending prayer time with my grandmother in that room and seeing the Caftan Brigade, and so on. And so that was the setting for it. And then as I thought more and more about what I'd like to write, I knew what I'd always wanted to write. It was a novel that explored race and the migrant experience more fully. And my previous novels had spoken very much to the Sri Lankan Tamil experience in Sri Lanka and their forced migration, and had to some degree explored the creation of home. But I had never really spent a huge amount of time in Australia and what it meant for those of us who've come here and tried to create a new home, but also to fit into the existing and evolving identity of what it means to be Australian. And so that was the harder part of the story for me, to really engage in some of those deeper, darker issues, honestly. And in some ways, I feel like I've been writing that part of the novel, Val, my entire life, because I've been thinking about those issues, what it means to be Australian and who gets to decide, to the inclusion of some and the exclusion of others, and where we fit in. Those ideas and thoughts and feelings have been in my mind and swirling in my heart for decades.
Wow. Okay. So why did you want to put them in a book? Why did you want to articulate all of that in a novel?
Because storytelling is my preferred mode of being, as it were. And I think, as you'll know, once you start writing, you can't stop, right? It becomes addictive, and it's therapeutic and cathartic and energizing all at the same time. And so I love the literary form, and I've tried and experimented with other forms, and at the moment I'm working on a television show adapting a short story that I wrote, and it's a really different form, and it's exciting and it's fast-paced and interesting and requires different technical skills. But I love the way the novel, or when you're writing the novel or when you're reading a novel, you can really sit in it and take time to get to know the characters, to explore who they are and who they want to be, where they've come from, and where they hope to go. And so that has been a chosen and a loving form for me, much loved and loving. I feel it loves me back. But also, I think, because I am a lawyer and I've come from that social justice background, the sort of bigger themes of life, the macro themes that concern the world, that can profoundly affect and disadvantaged marginalized communities, is also frequently on my mind. And it's what I do in my legal professional life. And often I think that life really spills into, if not I directly, it either spills into it accidentally, and often I just directly draw on it and try to create or at least explore social change through my literary work as much as I do through my legal work. And the reason I make that fine distinction, I think my legal work perhaps really does or potentially can lead to social change, because that's what the law is supposed to do. And my literary work, I don't in any way wish to overstate the value of my literary work. It attempts to explore that same journey of social change and the reason for it.
So I'm interested in knowing, in the creative process, which part came first, because as you say, you've been thinking of some of these questions all of your life just because of, the situation that you're in, where you've grown up, the things that you've experienced and so on, right? So you've been thinking of these bigger themes and bigger questions all of your life. But then in the storytelling context, you have characters, you have setting, you have scenes. Did you think first when you started writing, okay, I know I'm setting the nursing home and these are the themes I want to explore? Or did you, and then figured out how you would tell that through the characters? Or did you determine your characters and let it kind of just unfold?
Such a good question. That's a real writer's question. So with this particular novel, it was it was largely constructed. So I knew that I wanted to set it in a nursing home. I had toyed with the idea of setting a sort of quirky, whimsical novel in a nursing home. And I've wanted to try to write something, and I don't mean this sort of pejoratively or hierarchically or qualitatively. I have wanted to write something more lighthearted, at some point in my life, because I do my body of work, which I like to think of as a concept album, if only to get my children's attention by using the phrase concept album, is is concerned with themes of dispossession, justice, genocide, forced migration, cultural erasure, and the connections that we form to cope with all of that. So that is my body of work. And I had, when I thought I would set a novel in a nursing home, because there are so many funny stories that happen there, I thought, well, maybe I could make this a light novel or lighter. And yet I knew that I really wanted to explore race, and that this place would be a good place or a good setting in which to do that. And so I did map out, all right, who is going to drive a narrative about race? And I knew that and it was really, I found this novel technically and almost legally very hard, because it does grapple with the right to freedom of speech. It grapples with what we consider to be hate speech and what do we consider to be racial vilification. And there is a sort of a narrative around reverse racism in the novel. What is it, and does it actually exist, right? And who gets to call that out? And so that you have these characters, for example, who will argue the right to freedom of speech when they wish to other people. So when they wish to pick on and vilify minorities or people from the LGBTQI plus communities, they will hide behind the right to freedom of speech. However, then when they are called out for their bigotry, when they are accused of being racist or of being homophobic, they will then vilify that person who's called them out and totally deny their right to freedom of speech and accuse them of being un-Australian. And that has been a big feature of the public and political discourse over the last 10 years that I've been back in Australia. And that has really troubled me. And I thought, right, I do want to explore this. I think I'm emotionally ready, and in the arc of all of my writing is ready, I think. But I also really doubted my intellectual ability to do it.
What?
Yeah, I think I daily suffer from anxiety and insecurities around my abilities across any number of key competencies that are required of me, Val. But this one, I thought, I'm really, because race is so important in Australia. It's so important to me. It's important to my family's life. It's affected our own physical and emotional journey from Sri Lanka to London to Australia. And it's so important in this country. It's this massive, frequently unspoken issue. that stems from the foundation of modern Australia. And I thought, God, am I smart enough to do this? And I was sort of reaching for something big, but terrified that I didn't have the ability to deliver it. And that would feel like like more of a failure than usual. You know, if you sort of aim small and fail, you fail small. But if you aim big and fail, you fail big. And so I felt it almost like a sense of responsibility as well, in terms of exploring it, because there aren't many Sri Lankan Tamil authors or South Asian authors in Australia who have explored that issue in Australia. Because, you know, we could, between the two of us, I'm pretty sure we could name every Australian novel on race. And so, yeah, I felt a sort of a responsibility around it, and I essentially talked myself into a you know, anxiety spiral. And then eventually just sat down, took a deep breath, and constructed, these are the characters that I think will drive the action. These are the characters that I think need to interact with each other. Maya, the main character, I knew she was always there because, you know, she is this, I don't know why she was always there. She sort of physically looks a little bit like my grandmother, I suppose, but she's actually emotionally a better version of myself in 50 years. So she's elderly. In fact, to be honest, it's like in 42 years. So in 42 years, I'm hoping to be like Maya. So I always knew she was going to be there. And then I had to create characters around her that she would interact with, who would drive particular storylines. And both in the contemporary setting in Australia, but also characters who would have a history set in Sri Lanka that linked to Australia's history that I also wanted to explore, because the novel has two histories that intersect, not just the histories of the characters, where they are today, but where they were 20, 40 years ago, but also the histories of Australia's foundation, or the modern nation state of Australia's foundation, and Sri Lanka's foundation, and the way in which in both those countries, through colonization, cultural and historical narratives were appropriated and they were controlled by the colonizer in order to create a particular version of that country's foundation, to create its origins story, as it were. And from that, to then craft an identity that includes some and excludes others, and create a sense of territorial legitimacy, to use, you know, legal expression, to create that sense of ownership, who is allowed to own the country, who's allowed to be there, and who's not allowed to be there. And I wanted to try to explore both, because I think we share so much of that in common, Sri Lanka and Australia, the home of my ancestors and the home of my choice.
So based on everything you've just said, listeners, anyone who's listening, you can tell it's multi-layered, and yet it is not heavy going. So it may sound like there's so many things that you need to think of and consider, but when you're reading this book, you are just brought straight into it seamlessly, and it's not heavy going at all. And I'm going to discuss that a little bit further, because I tried to deconstruct why. But before we get to that, as you say, there are, you know, different characters, different themes, different time periods and locations, obviously. What did you have to do to map that out? Did you just start writing and see what happens, or did you kind of think, okay, well, I need this to happen here, and I need to make sure that I tell this bit of history before I get to this? Or, you know, how did you organize yourself?
Yeah, look, that's also a really good question. I reread 2 novels in the writing of this novel, and I think great writing is the best teacher for me. And so I reread Camilla Shumsey's Home Fire, and I reread Liane Moriarty's Big Little Lies.
Okay.
Because I think both novels use a person's perspective, the point of view, really well. Yeah, they do POV really, really well. And in Camilla Shumsey's Home Fire, what she does is, you know, there are 5 central characters. Each character gets 1 chapter, and she ends on a cliffhanger effectively, and the next chapter picks up where that left off, and there are clues seeded throughout, and it moves the story along. And so I actually tried to create that kind of structure. I also loved Big Little Lies, and I tried and I actually failed, because I ended up having to come back and forth between characters' points of view. I also love Big Little Lies because there is there's heaviness and depth to it, but incredible lightness as well, right?
Yeah.
With a fascinating lightness that she brings to it. It's almost not lightness of themes, but lightness of tone. And so you read very quickly, not just because she's got clues and secrets and lies and plot twists and cliffhangers, but the lightness of the tone, I think, really moves you through very quickly. And so I was trying to channel both the sort of literary greatness of Camilla Shumsey and the commercial greatness of Liane Moriarty, which is why I'm so happy that you feel there was a lightness to it, and an ease of reading. And in terms of tracking the history, I found with this particular novel that the flashbacks happened, and the history, the jumps to the past, ended up happening very organically. And I was surprised by that. And I think that I was probably was very fortunate enough to experience flow at certain times. And so I would, Maya would, she would explore something, or something would happen to her in the present, and it would trigger a memory of the past. And then I would very naturally just allow myself to go there. And I trusted that in the end, I would be able to fix anything that was that jarred or that did not transition seamlessly in the editing process. And I think as a writer, as I've grown and matured as a writer, I have definitely allowed myself to do a crap first draft and recognize that I will be able to solve all problems with the aid of brutal, but careful editing, and also with feedback from my trusted advisors. And so I was willing to kick certain cans down the road, because otherwise I would be paralyzed with performance anxiety, right? There's just no way. If you think you're going to get it, if I think I'm going to try to get it right first time round, it's not going to happen.
Right. So when you say that the flashbacks and therefore the history have happened quite organically, is it because you had developed the character so well in your head that you already kind of knew what that history was going to be, and therefore it made sense to be triggered? Or was it more, I feel like there's going to be Maya or whoever is going to remember something, and let's explore what that is. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm going to write my way into it.
God, I mean, unhelpfully, it was probably a mix of both. But I think I knew my key characters. And so the key flashbacks really occur with Maya and with Ruben. And with those two characters, they were the most, I went into this novel loving both of them the most, and being very clear about who they were as people, far more than the other characters. And the other characters, and I don't wish to sort of undermine them or sell them short, the other characters are, by the end of the novel and by the end of my rewrites, they were fully realized and they were nuanced, real people. You both love and hate Gareth, I think, by the end of it. But they initially, in the first 50,000 words, the first draft, and that was just the first half of the novel, those other characters were essentially just there to enable Maya and Ruben to do what they needed to do. And actually, by the end of the first 50,000 words, with the exception of Maya and Ruben, I really didn't like anybody in the novel. In the manuscript, I just, I was not in love with them in the way that I needed to be to spend so much time with them as you do when you're writing them. And I didn't even hate my villains, as it were, enough to want to keep hating them. And so actually at the 50,000 mark, which was halfway through the manuscript, the original manuscript, I put it down. And for the first time in my life, I walked away from a manuscript. And it was terrifying.
Walked away for forever? For how long? Or what?
For a good 6 months, actually. And it was really frightening, because I've never done that before. I'm not very good at giving up on something, particularly with writing. I'm probably very much a danger of flogging dead horses. But I just could not see my way forward. Maya and Ruben, were happening quite naturally, but the others, I didn't really know what was going on. And so I put it down, and I'm really grateful that other things happened to enable me to explore other creative projects. So I was involved in a show for the Sydney Festival, and I ended up writing a novella or a short story. It was a very long short story that I'm now adapting into a TV show with Larissa Behrendt. And that had just been an exercise in creativity at the time, something to break away from the manuscript and to give me a chance to trust my own creativity and to get it energized again. And so, you know, I wrote the novella. I was part of the Sydney Festival. I wrote a short story that Sweatshop published. There were some fun things that happened. And 6 months later, or 5 months later, maybe I came back to the manuscript. And I felt rested and energized, and that I missed my characters, and I was ready to go back to them and to try again. And at that point, COVID hit. You know, George Floyd was murdered. There was Asian hate going around the world. And it really, you know, this novel is about race, right? And so much of, you know, people of color and countries in the developing world were far more profoundly affected and are still by COVID than many other countries. And within first world countries, people of color and marginalized communities are more profoundly affected by COVID. And so just all that rage and grief that I had felt was then accelerated and exacerbated. And I think with that, I was just able to finish. I was able to do the last 50,000 words, and it wasn't just rage and grief. It was that, and it was hope. So there was a sense within me that if we keep trying to do better together, we will be okay. And I think that's where the manuscript itself and the novel Try Time at Cinnamon Gardens does end on that. You go on that journey of rage and grief with the characters, and I hope that you feel it too. And at the very end, feel a sense of hope in the strength of community.
So speaking of those characters, because as you say, you've written from different points of view, you know, from Maya, from Angeli, from, you know, Ruben, of different points of view. And it's interesting because when I read some books that are written in multiple points of view, and the author I kind of recognize, oh, you've dropped that in there just so that I know it's so-and-so speaking, or, you know what I mean? And I can tell, of course, yes, that the point of view has changed and who it is. With yours, not only can I tell that the point of view has changed and who it is, obviously, it's like it's a visceral experience in that I smell different things, I feel different things. The color is different in you know, what I'm experiencing. Everything is so distinctive in when we're changing from different points of view. Everything. It's not just words on the page. The entire experience, the reading experience, is so distinctive. What do you think you do to make that happen?
Firstly, thank you for saying that. That's really wonderful and high praise. That's right. That's my alarm telling me to pick up a child. Dang it. Let me just try and get rid of all of those while I'm talking to you. So firstly, thank you for that, Val, because it's hard. I think it's hard to achieve, and it's important to achieve it. A big part of it is a legal concept called know your client. So as lawyers, we were always taught very early on in our legal careers to know your client, and it means different things. But fundamentally, it means know your client. And so for me, it is know your character. So I spend a lot of time, and it's often at night. So I'll write, but at the end of the day, when I go to bed, I will lie down. And I'm not even sure my husband knows this. He probably doesn't. He doesn't listen to all my podcasts. So, because I'll lie down and go to sleep and think about the characters that I'm working on, or the character that I want to write the next day. And I will say to them, I wonder what you're going to do tomorrow, Ruben. And I will go to sleep imagining or thinking, I don't know, you know, what are you doing? You're constructing, you're writing, you're creating, you're allowing it to create itself. But I really am trying very hard to know them, but to also simply sit in the room with them. So that by the time I'm coming to write a chapter for Ruben or a chapter for Nikki, and I use, you know, the tricks of the trade, right? Every chapter is a discrete chapter for a discrete character, unlike Damon Galgood's recent Booker Prize winning novel, where one scene your multiple shifting points of view. I'm not technically that clever. So I will have one character per chapter, but they would have sat inside my head the night before. And I would have thought deeply about them. I would have really just felt as though I was in the room with them as I'm falling asleep. And then when I'm writing, I often am really just allowing myself to write what I'm seeing. So I am actually seeing it from their perspective. I'm not constructing it from their perspective. I'm seeing it from their perspective. And I am therefore smelling what they're smelling and feeling what they're feeling. And there are times I can catch myself just doing this, like I'm holding my hand, but actually I'm feeling as though I'm holding Maya's hand, so that I know the difference between her papery skin and Ruben's calloused skin.
Wow.
And it's a beautiful feeling, right? To be so immersed in a scene or a moment and an emotion, and to feel as though these people are with you and that you are with them. And I remember a writing teacher once said to me, she said, "Don't make it up, just write it down." And that's a very powerful statement when you think about it. Don't make it up, just write it down.
Yes.
So write down what you're seeing, but also allow yourself to see, allow yourself to feel what they're feeling. And, I think all of us writers and storytellers are deeply empathetic people. We're both observant and attentive to the details, and we are deeply empathetic.
Let's talk about that, observant and attentive to the details, because I know many other authors who, they are seeing it from the character's point of view. They are experiencing those things and they are writing those things down. However, your level of observation is off the charts. And I think that is what makes it so seamless, because every single sentence, when you actually deconstruct it, because I just can't help myself, has so much in it and yet does not feel heavy, right? I've learned so much about whether it's about the character, about the setting, about the emotion, about the tiniest details. I don't know whether you're doing that consciously or whether you're just naturally that observant, but I think that is what brings you straight into the story and just keeps you there. And I keep using the word seamless because that's the only word I can think of at the moment. And I tried to figure out why, because it's set in a nursing home, right? So it's not like the world is about to self-destruct and it's an action thriller and it's not the pace that's keeping you there, right? So I was trying to figure out what it was. And I do think that level of observation really brings the reader and into the world in such a way that many other books, quite frankly, don't. Is that a conscious thing that you try hard at, or you just annoyingly skilled?
Well, now that you've told me which answer you would prefer, Val.
No. Yeah, be honest.
Yeah, no, I will, and I, me well enough by now to know that I'm not, I don't have tickets on myself in any respect. I think, again, it is very much a combination of both, right? But also, I think, remember that when it comes to observation, as I said to you with this novel, I feel like I have been, it has been gestating in my mind and in my heart for decades, because it explores what I'm seeing, what I've seen around me since I was a child. And so if I have been attentive and observant to the details and captured them, it's because I've been watching a very long time. And so much of this was simply an articulation of everything I've seen, thought, and felt since I was little. And therefore, I think there are times when I wrote things down and didn't even realize that I was doing it until I went back to read it and thought, oh, I'm glad you remembered that, Shankari, from 1982. because my conscious mind didn't remember it, but my unconscious mind had clearly filed it away for a novel that Shankari would one day write, 4 decades later. And so there was absolutely an aspect of that. I think in the construction of a lot of the political and public narrative, that was very much researched and really deliberate. So I went looking for example, and this was both easy and difficult to do. Difficult to, I think, to get it right, but easy to find, is that white right narrative, right? The right wing, the very angry white narrative that exists. And it's a minority of people in the public space, but they are vocal and they are given a very large platform. They're very well paid and very powerful to express certain views. And that could only be the case if they were speaking to a silent and significant presence within the population. And therefore that narrative, which I felt was really important to get right. I mean, every bit of any narrative is incredibly important to get right, but it was really important for me to feel that I had nailed that and done it justice, so that everybody from my beautiful woke friends, my left-wing progressive work for not-for-profits in the justice space friends, to people at the other end of the spectrum who may or may not ever want to pick up this novel, and everybody in between could read that novel and not feel that it was a farce, but rather an accurate social commentary. I don't want anyone to look at it and dismiss it for being farcical, because it isn't. I don't think it is. I think it is an honest representation of something that plays out over and over again. And I wanted people with that particular narrative to really recognize that Gareth, so Gareth is the character within this novel who drives a lot of the sort of racist actions that come from or because of Gareth. And so with Gareth, what I really wanted people to understand is that we're all a little bit like Gareth. We actually all have Gareth inside us. We definitely all know Gareth. We've been to dinner with Gareth. Gareth comes to our house for dinner. Yep. We allow Gareth, we enable him. He makes jokes and we let them go. Sometimes we laugh at them politely. Sometimes we laugh at them because we thought that ourselves, but we're too polite to say it out loud. And all of that is something that I want to put up and out there and say, well, let's talk about that. Let's respectfully and constructively, with humility and curiosity, and actually with love, let's deconstruct that together. Because if we don't do it in that way together, where this is only ever actually going to end badly. And you look 50 years into the future or 100 years into the future, Sri Lanka from 400 years ago headed in a particular direction towards war, and we don't have to be like that. We have an opportunity to do differently, to do better.
Do you think that the next novel you write will have similar themes, or are you writing your next thing already?
I am. Okay. Yeah, I am. And it is absolutely exploring a theme, a big and important theme in Australia. And I'm feeling increasingly comfortable, Val, really occupying my own Australianness in its own form. And I'm really enjoying that, actually. I'm really enjoying sitting within my Australianness and just saying, look, this is who I am and this is how I am. And it could actually just be a function of the fact that I'm 47 and I'm getting better at being comfortable in my own skin, right? Sure. And in all the ways of that skin, ill-fitting such as it is. And so, and therefore to that end, the next novel is again centered in Australia, like this one, whereas my first two were spent or were largely set in Sri Lanka. This next novel, like Chai Time at Cinnamon Gardens, is largely set in Australia. There will be some references to Sri Lanka, but it is, again, much more, as with Chai Time at Cinnamon Gardens, an exploration of life in Australia for a particular kind of migrant. And that's all I'm going to say about the new novel, but only because that's sort of where it's at. But, you know, someone recently asked me, and he's a good friend and just a dear person, and he asked me, and he's a white Australian, and he said, you know, do you think that your next novel is going to be about Sri Lanka too? You know, are you just going to write about Sri Lanka, or are you going to write about other things? And I laughed and I just said, you know, I'm pretty sure that no one ever asks, you know, Jane Harper or Liane Moriarty or Trent Dalton if they're going to set another novel in Australia about white people. But in answer to your question, yes, it will be set partly in Sri Lanka and mostly in Australia this time.
Oh, I can't wait. Okay, so finally, what was penultimately, finally, what was the hardest or most challenging thing about writing it, and what was the most rewarding?
Wow, I guess those two things could well be the same thing, right?
Yeah,
I think it goes back to the reach of the ambition with this particular manuscript or this particular novel. Because I was, and everything I've ever written about has been important to me, right? My first novel was about 3 generations of a Sri Lankan Australian Tamil family, and their journey to Australia and how they survived the Sri Lanka Civil War. That is important to me. But with this story, I think I also felt that because of the themes I was going to attempt, and if I attempted them and got it right, that it was a novel that would call more attention to myself. So, you know, writers are introverted, right? Well, I am. Let me speak just for myself and not for my writing community. I am deeply introverted and also very shy and quite like my own company or that of my children and cousins, and that's kind of it. And so this novel felt very intimate. I felt very exposed because I was literally telling you what I think and feel about what it means to live in this country, a country that I love and do not always feel accepted by. And it was therefore the most honest and intimate exploration that I could possibly, to the best of my ability, have put down on paper. It is my love letter to Australia. And as with all love letters, you know, there are moments of anger and grief in it, and moments of deep and abiding love. And so I felt very exposed in writing it. And that was the hardest thing, to feel the confidence and the courage. No, it wasn't even the confidence, to feel the courage to expose myself in that way, to then reach for what I was reaching for with the novel, to write something about race, and then to know whether or not I had achieved it. And I am my own worst critic or greatest critic. I think I am hard on myself, but rightly so. And therefore, I wasn't sure if I would achieve what I set out to achieve.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, you knocked it out of the park.
Thank you.
So,
that means so much to me coming from you.
Everyone needs to read this book. But anyway, let's finish on what are your top 3 tips for aspiring writers who would like to be in a position where you are one day?
Yeah. I would say, firstly, just keep writing. So write as much as you can, and write every day if you can, even if it's just for 10 minutes. Write, because the more you write, the better you get. The more I write, the better I get. So I would say write. Secondly, I would say don't listen to other people who tell you that you can't do it, that you won't do it, that you'll never finish it, that it doesn't make any money, that it's not a real job, that it's just a hobby. Don't listen to those people. Just listen to yourself. Listen to your creative urge within. Listen to that creative drive and passion. Don't listen to them. Just listen to yourself. And thirdly, trust that when you put one word down, another word will come. So which essentially is my first piece of advice, just keep writing. When you put one word down, the next word will come.
Wonderful. And on that note, congratulations on Chai Time in Cinnamon Gardens. It's just absolutely brilliant. Everyone, get yourself a copy. Not only is it a fantastic novel in terms of its story and themes, get it because this woman has mastered the craft. I mean, this may be her third novel, but it's like she is a writing veteran that's been writing for decades, and get it even just for that. So, absolutely brilliant book. Thank you so much, Shankari.
Thank you, Val. Thank you.